Sorry about all this. My name is Sam Ruby, IBM Emerging Technology, co-chair of W3C HTML Working Group, and I've worked on the feed validator, and that's a bit relevant to some of the topics I'm bringing up. I share a lot of Brad's perspectives, and actually you'll see we would actually share some tastes in music, not music, in movies. All these slides will be up on the web. You can see the link here, but they'll be up for everybody to get to. And there'll be links. I also have a weblog. The weblog has a fair amount of SVG. Every single one of my every single one of my entries has got an SVG element. I've done that for several years. Most of them are completely handcrafted, and I was going to demo that, though I can't. I've got technical difficulties that are preventing me from actually demoing me editing in VI, which is just as exciting as it sounds. These are all inline SVG elements, all served as application XHTML plus XML, and I do some special magic to make SVG Web work with this on IE. So even though this is not officially supported, I support it anyway. That's not just on every image. I do some creative things to show the same images on my archives page, so you can actually see on various days what I posted on and go to them. It's very helpful to be able to just see an image, and that helps you quickly find the entry you want to find on my weblog. My site's called Intertwingly because I tend to believe that things are often intermixed and related in interesting and wonderful ways, and sometimes not so wonderful ways. A lot of things Brad said, this works. Like, for example, you can search and do hypertext links. There's usually a little asterisk next to that. It works as long as you do this, that, and the other, but not if you do this other third thing. And that other third thing is the thing you end up finding out accidentally when you run into it, not because it's well documented everywhere. And I'll show an example or two of that. So the things are often all knotted up. Ground rules. This is everything I'm presenting here. As I said, will be online. You should see it already is. Most important stuff first. If I happen to run over time, I just will kind of cut short. What I really mean by that is feel free to ask questions. This is a reasonably small enough audience where if you got something to say, that's fine. Presentation contains some code, but this is all faster when it's local. Don't focus on the details. Focus on the social ramifications. That's really what I'm here to talk about. Question for the audience. How did you learn HTML? Reading the spec? And formal education? There are classes on this stuff. Still no hands. Come on. From a book? There are books. Hey, we got a couple book. And view source. Okay, that's as to be expected. Change the question to SVG. How many people learned SVG from reading the spec? It's a different, okay, formal education. From a book. And view source. Okay, for me, I started with the spec. For HTML, of course, it was the other way around, and augmented with view source. Where's the source? A typical site like this one happens to have some SVG, but you don't get to see it. It's not really SVG that's shown there for various technical reasons. But hidden away in this particular one, in a link, that if you go to About and scroll to the bottom, you might actually be able to find there is a link to the header graphics. And if you go there, you find an SVG image, and I don't know what the key button is for view source, but I'll okay, I'm going to just back up. Well, I'll go ahead and do it. View source, page source. Okay, so that's the wrong source. Close that. No, that's fine.
Okay.
It's not so important on this case. So In this one case, you can get to it, but it's not all that obvious. Let me contrast something else that's a little more viral than SVG has been to date. PHP. Lots of people code in PHP, and one convention they've got is on their website, even though PHP is all server-side stuff, at the bottom of every single page they've got, right next to their item link, is a show source button that will actually show the source of the server code. So that this is very helpful for getting people to learn PHP. They can actually see it on the site and actually view the source and use it. You don't tend to see that as often in SVG, and that's something I think needs to be improved. More people's experience is they see this little mushroom and they learn SVG that way. It's sort of hidden for them because it's actually taken care of. This is the icon for Inkscape. If they do happen to view source, what they see is this. Some people call this namespace spawn. Okay, this is not the ideal way to learn SVG. Jeff, I presume, will be talking about Scour later. I see a hand. Okay, if that was a question, what he asked was, is that the idea to split it into smaller pieces so people can learn the individual smaller pieces? My experience has been it almost takes hand editing to get to the point where it's a good teaching aid. Things that are generated by code tend to look like they were generated by code, and I'll show you in a second. View source sounds good, but what's the downside? This is, I'll come back to that in a second. View source sounds good, but what's the downside? And as I said, we got similar tastes in movies. You have to be willing to seek the truth. You have to take the red pill. This is where you get to see the grungy side. This is where you actually go down and see the truth as it really is. And I'll touch on a number of aspects of that in my presentation. In particular, obviously homage to the matrix. Tolerance is a key aspect. And I'm going to talk about tolerance in a couple different ways. First, Pastel's law. Be conservative in what you do, liberal in what you accept from others. This is controversial right now in the HTML and SVG communities. The idea that SVG, when put in HTML context, the browsers will tend to view it in a very tolerant fashion, which means if someone misses a quote, they'll try to still render it. That is controversial in the sense that you can then put something in HTML. When you're done, you got something you might not be able to take back out. And you still will be able to. MIME type, text HTML, MIME type is forgiving. If you send it as HTML, it will be forgiving. If you send it as application XHTML plus XML, it's called draconian. If it's got a parse error, nothing will display. And homage to another movie, choose wisely. That's a link to Indiana Jones. XHTML, service text HTML is not processed as XML. This is what I'm going to show about the red pill aspects of it. CSS acts differently, JavaScript acts differently, namespaces don't work. It's parsed differently. A couple just aspects of that. Actually, it's parsed subtly differently, which makes it worse. It's not like it's black and white. It almost works almost all the time. And then there's one or two edge cases. There's a link to more details, but really just meant to give us some highlights. Script source equals, and you give something and you use the /greater than. Despite the fact that I have done this for a number of years, I still trip over this to this day every once in a while. When you do that in HTML, it eats the rest of your page. Hopefully, basically the entire rest of the page is treated as if it were a script. Waiting on the network, come on. Apologize for all this. But it does eat the rest of your page in text HTML mode because it's looking for an end close script tag. If you've got BR/BR, so you take the opposite thing, which is say, okay, I can't always use the closing thing, so I'll actually use the opposite. That's treated as 2 line breaks in HTML mode. That's just the way browsers are implemented. So I actually have got code in some of my source that does things like, these are the list of 5, 10, 11, 12 elements that can use self-closing elements, and that's what you should use. Everything else should not. And then an XPath expression is to say find all elements that don't have subchildren and don't have text, and if so, add a text node. This is code in Ruby using RexML that will basically clean up XML before you serialize it. Things you've got to deal with if you wish to remain using XML tools to do this. Another subtle difference, pre, line, close pre. This is a pre-formatted thing in HTML. In HTML, that's one line. It shows up as one line, so what do you expect? In XHTML, what you see is actually two lines, a line break followed by one line. Because in XHTML, the pre-element is followed by a new line, and that new line is actually in the DOM. Subtle differences that will trip you up if you want to keep using XHTML mode. So XHTML has been preached for a long time, particularly by the W3C. It's not necessarily something I would recommend, despite the fact that it's what I pretty much exclusively use. And this presentation itself is XHTML, which is sort of what is required right now today to do this demo. Tolerance means tolerance of user mistakes, tolerance of different values and perspectives. How many anchor tags in the following? How many A tags do you see there? 1, 2. The right answer is 1. The reason why is plain text is an element that says the rest of the page is to be treated as is. It's sort of an archaic element. It's strongly deprecated, but it's still implemented by all the browsers today. Now the next question is, where does that anchor point? It actually points before the table. The reason why is browsers today, when they see the table tag, you can't actually render a table until you actually read the contents. They come through the table and they get to this thing that doesn't belong in a table and says, what should I do with it? And historically, their choices were to throw it away or just simply render it right now and get back to doing my table and then render the table. So what it ends up doing is it ends up reordering the page. This is how browsers are forgiving. These are things that end up making lives more difficult. The good news is there are tools like HTML2XML and XHTML, XML2HTML that can take all these things and give you the clean output that matches precisely HTML5's behavior, and HTML5's behavior is engineered to exactly what browsers are doing. So while I'm saying here's all the messy things, at least I'm saying here's a tool that can help you. And hopefully there'll be more. 3 ways to embed SVG. You can use an object tag. This is what's been documented in the HTML standard for years. You can use the embed tag, which is what Netscape has been using, but it hasn't been documented until HTML5. An image source is sort of what most people would think to use and would want to use. Guess which one doesn't work in Firefox today? I heard a chuckle. I assume that's because you know. Right. Image source doesn't work. Anybody guess why? I don't think it's obvious. Security. He's got the right answer. It seems odd to me that you look at this, and this is just syntax. So if someone who's just producing syntax, it's just another spelling way of doing it. But it turns out object and embed intentionally create boxes, or sandboxes as it were, and they do that up front, and there's secure thought given to that. An image, they say, I'm just going to assume it's going to go. It's okay, just a bunch of bits. Well, it turns out SVG is not just a bunch of bits. It can have dynamic behavior. That dynamic behavior could do things like leak passwords, capture clicks. That is kind of scary. Now, Firefox is the only browser right now that doesn't. Right now, Opera and WebKit do support SVG with an image tag. They only support a subset of it, though. They do not support the scripting behaviors of it. So that's an example of where it seems like it should all work, but that's where there's a little asterisk that says, but if you do it this way, you can't do these other things. It's like you can't have the hypertext links if you do it with an image tag. Sorry, what? Inline versus embed. My page uses inline. Here's an embedded image, and here's an inline image. They look about the same. On my screen, they actually were a lot closer together, but that's cool. This has got a hypertext link on the embedded image. This will show an example of why the embedded image is a sandbox. If you click on the link, what you're actually going to see is the actual web page that this link to in kind of a very small place because it was sandboxed. The exact same image inline gives you a link to the page. It behaves differently depending on how you did that. So these are the things that it should all just work, and yes, you get all these behaviors, but you end up finding out that they're not quite. SVG integrates better with XHTML. You can do more. That's how I do it. But nobody uses XHTML. And by that I mean the MIME type. Actually, almost nobody. I do. Is SVG and HTML the answer? A couple of issues. By and large, it is. Graceful degradation. If you do SVG inline, not Brad's way, which is using the script tag, you have to do things like avoid the self-closing syntax. So your SVG images need to use path, close path. If you want to have the page served as text HTML and actually processed properly by some browsers. Okay, it turns out there are techniques to get it to work without the self-closing syntax with IE, and that's if you serve everybody but IE, application XHTML plus XML, you're okay. But most people don't want to use the actual MIME type because that means they've got to be draconian. The other issue is unknown tags may be ignored, but the naked text will be displayed. So if you mark it as C data, XML will treat that as if it were text, and HTML will treat that as a comment. Little workarounds that over time I've developed because I've been developing this stuff. SVG is valid in HTML5. It's part of the spec. It says you can actually include it. Other namespaces are not.
Except MathML.
MathML, yes. And Xlink. Almost all generated SVGs I've seen, actually probably all generated SVGs I've seen, contain some foreign namespace. So if you copy and paste that into a document, you will get validation errors. That will tend to discourage the use of SVG inline. That will undermine the credibility of the validator. That's not good social engineering. I say it's not currently valid. It's actually under active discussion. There's a bug report open that's in active debate on how it should be dealt with. The current status of that bug report is as follows. HTML defines the mapping of the bytes to the DOM, and then element names may contain a colon. When it gets into the DOM, you might have a colon in the element names. SVG defines a valid set of elements in the SVG namespace, but SVG does not currently define element names with a colon. So could you have a RDF colon about element name in SVG's namespace? Is that valid? There is no spec right now that says that is valid. Notice it's RDF colon about. It's not RDF expanded to some prefix to the RDF namespace. It's literally the character string, RDF colon. So these things are kind of on the edge. And again, the social engineering aspects are what I really don't like, which is people who try to use SVG find out that they just copy and paste, and all of a sudden the validator says you're doing it bad. And trust me, most users of validators aren't that sophisticated. They just say, I'm doing it bad. What am I doing wrong? Yes. Can you speak up? Okay, I was using the word DOM not necessarily literally. Basically, a lot of the implementations I know are built on DOMs. There is actually no requirement that HTML requires a DOM. It's just a shorthand way of saying this is how it would be represented in a abstract tree. So no, I wasn't implying any sort of implementation. I was being imprecise. No, that's fine. Okay, so the current stance at the moment is that it's not valid. And again, I find that unfortunate from a social engineering perspective. The other one is Microsoft's got a proposal for allowing namespaces in HTML syntax, and that's under active debate too, and we'll see how that one goes. This is a link to the proposal that just came out literally 2 days ago. And people are noticing that the proposal doesn't match IE's behavior in a number of interesting ways, and so that's going to impede its ability to succeed. Validation in general, yes.
It gives you less backwards compatibility, but its levels are less crazy, so that actually might help us. The most of guys seem to be saying that no, there's certain things we don't want to propagate. This is stupid, you shouldn't do this.
Yes. At the moment, they're actually not actively saying that. They're actually participating in the discussion, but actually not actually making clear statements like we are going to implement this, etc. It's out for discussion. So at the moment, it's a little unclear. I'm obviously actively watching it. I'm very hopeful because I would like to see namespaces work. The idea of validation in general, I think, is something we need to rethink as a community. Google.com, if you validate it, it's got a whole bunch of errors. And yet, I don't believe any browser in the world could ship that did not support Google's homepage. I think that's a requirement. These errors, as it were, are not accidental oversights. I don't believe that Google doesn't have the resources to address these. I believe they are intentional. They are put in there and saying, look, we can save 4 bytes by losing the 3 bytes, by losing the MP semicolon, because it doesn't matter. All the browsers implement it the same way. So it's almost like we need another mode of validation that says, just tell me the things that do matter, versus here's all the things that where it's somebody's opinion that this is not the right way to do it. So I'm sharing some of my own personal opinion on how validation should work, and I'm starting to invest some time in backing that up by working on the validator, the HTML5 validator. Now, the dangers it warns about are real. You can actually, if you don't actually, when you just put an ampersand without caring about what goes after it, you can actually get entities accidentally that you didn't mean to. It's rare, but it can happen. But they only apply in certain circumstances. And they may not apply to the situations where the validator flags as a bug. So a lot of people are choosing to ignore the validator. And many cases amount to recommendations. For example, font is treated as non-conforming because style is preferred. So you can make a generic transformation of font tags into span style equals in the same the font stuff, and you've added no value. You could not change the behavior one bit. You've not changed the number of browsers that support it, not changed the breadth or the media independence of it one bit. Yet all of a sudden one is valid and the other one is not. Omitted end tags are more likely to cause hard to debug problems. You're allowed to omit end tags for list items, for example. More likely to cause problems, but that's not flagged. My first SVG was this Gump bench. This is the first thing I ever did. I did it I was flying on an airplane, bored out of my mind. I had the SVG spec. I had a cute little tool. Well, this is actually the source. You can actually take a look at this source, and this source is an example of source that looks like it was edited by a human because it was. This is stuff I did 5-6 years ago. I mean, a post, a foot, the back, a seat, and then a box of chocolates. And the bench has got lots of use statements, which you don't tend to see in generated code. The use is an affordance more for human authors, in my opinion, that says, I have this one reusable element, I apply it 3 or 4 times. So the bench has got slats. I've got several foots, a couple of posts and the like, and I apply it with just changing the X and Y. This looks like code you could say, I could pick that up and change it. I can modify it. It looks like it was edited by a human. And again, I used a tool called Batik, which we have one of the main authors of right here. All I did on the airplane, I had 3 windows up. I had VI, I was editing in text, another window I used command prompt that used Java dash, the name of the jar for Batik, and actually converted that to an image. Another was just a browser could see the image. And I had time to kill, and I just one by one edited this thing and went through the build cycle, etc. It sounds boring as all. I now do it. I was going to demo it how I do it today, which is a little faster, but still boring as all get out. It passes the time, and it's been interesting and educational to me. The demo was how I took an image that looks kind of like the Internet Explorer, actually the old version of the Internet Explorer logo, took an image of that is sort of like Chrome, and I don't actually be able to do the demo, but I built this image that looks kind of like a mashup of the two. This is what I've been using on my weblog to talk about the I call it Chrome IE, but it's Chrome's Google Chrome framework. Google Chrome Frame, I'm going to just review it right now in the context of SVG. It doesn't support application XHTML plus XML. You cannot serve that MIME type and have Google Chrome Frame take it. That kind of blows me out of the water because that's the MIME type I'm using. But few people do use that MIME type, so it's not a big problem. The only real problem is the high percentage of people do make keynotes. It does support image source equals because that's one thing WebKit does. Unfortunately, I would not recommend it because you can't do things like animation. And if you do that, you can't use Firefox, which cuts you out of a good portion of the browser market that does support SVG. This is another example of one of those asterisks, so don't go there. It does support embed. So the embed tag works. So if you actually did want to use SVG in Google Chrome Frame, you use text HTML and embed. This is one of those, you can get there from here, but only this way type of paths, and I seem to find a lot of those. Links are sandboxed, as I showed you. If you actually have a hypertext link in an embed tag, it'll actually just show up inside that little sandbox. So it's not quite what you might want. And content negotiation can be improved. I've discussed it on my weblog. That's really outside the scope of this. Wrapping up, recommendations from me to you. Show your source. If you've got SVG on your site, go out of your way to try to make it obvious and how to find the source to it. Be tolerant of users. In other words, people who build SVG are going to make mistakes. Figure out a way to deal with it versus actually just saying no. If nothing else, they outnumber you. Specs that seem arbitrary generally aren't. There's lots of rules and things that are built in specs, and people have all sorts of interesting debates where they take one side or the other and say, obviously it's got to be this way. And they're looking at one aspect of the problem, and somebody else looking at a completely different aspect comes to a completely different conclusion. And that's why most of the debates I see happen. There actually are reasons for most of these things. And my last real comment is we may need multiple validator profiles. I actually do believe that namespaces inside SVG that's copy and pasted probably should not get the same level of warning or error as things are just put randomly in HTML. So figuring out exactly when and where, that's going to be interesting. People have strong debates and whatever. And it might just be we have multiple different profiles and validate to each. I forgot what time I'm supposed to end, but well ahead of time or on time or what? Okay. Questions? No? Yes. Am I an inventor of SVG? No. I just happen to be a user of SVG who has been using it now for several years on his weblog, and I found some interesting issues and invited to a keynote. We're on the original.
Anyone who's ever been in the SVG working group, please stand up. Sorry, you gave a positive attitude. Anyone else who's contributed, has been on World SVG or any other mailing list or has contributed in any way, stand up.
Okay, I've contributed.
2/3 of the people in this room will be winners.
These two the most guilty, however.
Well, I wanted to say it's very
Okay. I would second that. I've been using it for years. I enjoy it, despite the fact that my pitch sounds a bit of a downer, but it actually is someone who's excited and is willing to try to work through the issues.